Hello there, RC here. I'm going to do another video on facilities. This one's going to be on rail. I have a couple examples of things you can use to show rail, or you can just use something like that. It doesn't matter. It's up to you, whatever works for your game, as long as you understand what you're using. All right. This video is going to be broken up into chunks, and just pardon the camera moving around. As a facility, it's going to be built in the place units box. It's going to have some specific things about it that are going to be important and not important. So I'm just going to leave this as kind of an introduction, and I'm going to tell you that this video is going to be a little bit clippy because I got to scroll through so much stuff in the rule book to go forward and back into different sections of it. So I just want to make sure it's easy, concise, and I'm not fluffing the video while I'm spending all my time scrolling and wasting yours. All right, and for that, I'll leave you here and I'll see you next. Okay, RC here, I'm back again. Railroads, you can first find them in the rule book in section 1, which is the map, because it describes everything that's on the map. And in 1.14 for railroads, shows railroads are drawn on the map in checkered lines or dashed lines. Regular railroads are depicted with a white dashed lines, and broad gauge with yellow dash. Technically, actually, is a long dashed lines for the regular, and short white and black dashed lines for the broad gauge. Railroads are used for strategic rail movement, and it shows you where you can find that in 10.4. Tracing supply paths, you can find that in 1.5 and 11.4. And railroads can also be built, and it shows you the statistics on where and when and how to build facilities in section 12, and specifically in section 12.11 for railroads. All right, so I'm just going to show you quickly on the map what a railroad looks like. And I'm using this spot here because you can see two different types of railroad right away. And I'm just going to zoom this in a little bit so it's even easier to see the difference here. Now, in the red USSR controlled sections of the map, you can see these checked or dashed lines signifying railroads. They interconnect in certain ways. You'll notice there's not one directly between these two, so you'd have to go around the long way, right? Little things like that. You also notice that these are fairly short, right? Short checks. And then as soon as you cross into the section over here in Europe, the checks get rather, oh, that doesn't belong there, but that doesn't matter. The checks get rather long and exaggerated in comparison to the broad gauge rail. So if you're using the optional rule for different rail gauges, that's important. If you're just going to play the basic game, it doesn't matter. A rail line's a rail line. All right. The only time that the broad gauge optional rule comes into play is in section 10.5 for strategic rail moves, and I'm not going to go into that in this video. All right. So this is just a quick look at it on the map. And there you go. And that's a quick brief detail on where you can find the different sections in the railroad section to describe what you can do with railroads. All right, I'm going to leave you there and I'll do another. All right, I see here we're in section 12 where it describes unit types and facilities. And this is the basic 12.3 describes facilities. And this is important besides the specific rail section because it represents important infrastructure in a zone. Facilities can be built without the presence of a factory. So you don't need a factory to build a rail line or a factory. You just need to build it. Most facilities are considered to have built-in anti-aircraft guns. However, that does not apply to railroads that defend them against strategic bombing. Most facilities can be damaged by strategic railroads. That does apply to by strategic bombing, that does apply to railroads. And most facilities may be captured, and that also applies to railroads. So the only thing that the railroads don't have on this sheet is they don't have built-in anti-aircraft guns. And I'm just going to scroll for a second because this is the same section here where it describes railroads rather clearly. It gives you a nice chart on how to build them and whatnot. So let me just try to put that more or less centered there. All right. So then underneath facilities, it just breaks down each type of facility. As you can see, coastal artillery is above. 12.11 railroads. So railroads are placed on a land zone border. If a land zone has a border with a crossing railroad, the railroad allows rail movement across that border and is considered to connect to other rail lines present in that zone, including rail lines built on other zone borders. And again, it says quite clearly, railroads do not have inherent or built-in anti-aircraft artillery. Now, they got this handy little chart here. And if you're not using the optional rule of terrains, then you only need to worry about this one side here, the normal terrain. All right, so we're just going to cover that first, and then I'm going to briefly list this one. So the price to cross a border of normal terrain to normal terrain is 2. The damage is possible by strategic bombing. Maximum damage is of 1, and the cost to repair the damage is 1 per damage. All right, so like all repairing facilities or whatever, that happens at the start of your turn, and there you go. Okay, now if you're using, and that way you can use the facility during that turn of your own, right? So you repair it first, and then you start moving units around. That way you can use the railroad for that purpose. Now, if you're using desert, jungle, marsh, mountain, any of these optional rules, or either one of them or all of them, then everything is the same as normal terrain. It just doubles in cost, right? So even if it's just a desert border, desert on one side, jungle, normal on the other, it's still going to apply. All right. So the price doubles from 2 to 4. It's also useless if damaged in any way. Maximum damage doubles from 1 to 2, so it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2, as the useless if damaged describes. If it's damaged in any way, it's unusable. And it costs 1 IPP per damage point to repair it, right? So if it's 1 damage, is 1. If it's 2 damage, it's going to cost 2 to repair. All right, so that's basically that for railroads. Now, I'm going to use a kind of wild option here. And I'm going to show you how this works. All right, start your turn, you're buying all your stuff. You're going to say, I, as the Italian player, are going to build a railroad. So you place it on the production chart in the appropriate stage, which is stage 1. And that's it. Well, that's not quite it. If you're the Italian player, you're going to build this railroad. You want to connect this railroad from Tobruk here into Cyrenaica's. I picked the wrong place to pronounce the names. You would place a under construction marker there. All right, and that would be on the border of the city to this location, right? And then you place your rail. Now, if you're not having damaged under construction markers, that's fine. Just put it upside down. You don't have to use those, right? Or if you decide, hey, I'm not going to use that, I'm just going to use one of these, that's fine too. You're signifying I'm building a rail, right? But no, you cannot use that rail until your next turn, because it's not going to be finished in production until the end of this turn. All right? So what that does is that grants rail access to this entire zone, right? Now, should you instead build the rail here, that would grant rail access to both these zones, and if there was any connecting rails that ran into them, it would continue the rail line. Now, there's no other rail lines here, right? But if you had an additional rail here, this rail line that goes all through Africa and into the Middle East and connects all the way to Europe would now come all the way to Tobruk as it does, and this would allow it to enter here, and this would allow it to enter here, and then lo and behold, should you decide to build a third one over here into Tunisia, that would connect to this rail up here and transfer all the way to there, right? So that's the point of building it on borders, right? Now, all these zones are desert zones, so they would, if you're using that optional rule, these cost 4 each. If you're not using the desert rule, these would just be 2 each, all right? So here's a prime example of there's no territorial zones between Andalusia and Portugal. So this, even if you're using terrain, would be a $2 cost to cross that border and a $4 cost to cross this border because there's mountain on one side or the other. It doesn't have to be both, just has to be one side. All right, so that's how that works. And with the built-in, or the lack of anti-aircraft guns built in, you would literally have to have anti-aircraft guns in this zone and in this zone to protect both these zones from a strategic bombing. If they get damaged, you just signify it's damaged with this, and then you can't use the rail in that zone for any purpose, right? Which is why you got to repair it to remove this and make it back into rail for this zone. The rail would still apply to either end, but it wouldn't apply to this zone specifically, right? So you don't have to remove that, just show that it's damaged in this zone, right? So this zone's still undamaged, but this zone is damaged. All right, does that make sense to you? Perfect. So that's my understanding of placing and building and everything with rail. All right, so I'll leave you there. Okay, so that was a brief synopsis on rail as a facility. I didn't cover how it's used as a supply path, how it's used as a lend-lease route, or how you can use it for strategic rail moves. I found that that's going to be such a huge video that it'll be like half an hour long and you'd never be able to find what you're looking for. So I'm going to break that up into little sections. I'm going to even put them out in little separate videos. I'm not quite sure yet, but just so you know, that's the purpose of this here. This is just a basic introduction into the rail, and we'll look at it from then on. All right, so hopefully you enjoy. You guys have any comments about this, or suggestions, or corrections, or hey, I do it this way, or house rules you use with it? Feel free, fire them on my comment section. I'm always willing to look at that stuff. And maybe, who knows, I might do another video on something that you're putting out there. All right. And I'm not afraid to change my videos if something's wrong. So feel free. Fire it at me. All right. Anyway, thank you. This is RC. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I enjoy making them for you. And have a good time and enjoy your game.